Oh, that cracker tried to kill me. It's like a thing. If you're speaking, the cracker tries to kill you. Um, uh, so, as we are soliciting stories like Dan's about why you've made Central your home, we're also kind of looking around Los Angeles and seeing what other churches are doing, particularly other progressive churches and other churches that uh, claim or are doing something new. And so a few weeks ago, some of us went over to a different church that has a reputation of doing things in a new way. And I want to be really upfront about something. I wasn't there to worship. I was there to compare. This was an academic visit for me. I've had enough experiences with church that I was pretty confident that this church is the church for me, and the way that we do things is the way that I can experience worship. So it was pretty academic for me. I took a lot of notes. Um, I wanted to see if they were doing anything that we should be doing. I also wanted to see what was making them successful, especially how they were getting so many young people, or just so many people, period, out to church post COVID when you could attend church from your couch. So we were at this church because they were supposedly doing things that were new. And so, first thing that happened is one of the pastors came out onto the stage and she spoke. And then she introduced the lead pastor, the white guy. And I watched her leave and I watched him come to the center. And they did that a couple times. And I realized that they were both sort of like disappearing and then reappearing. They were coming and going from the wings, from this backstage area. It was a small theater. And so when they weren't speaking, they were not visible and they were not approachable. And when they were speaking, they had a sort of spotlight that followed them to the center. And for a while I was like, okay, so that's how they do it. And then I was like, why? Like, and then I became aware of the effect of that stagecraft on me and on the room and on the whole experience. This was really the choreography of performance, right? So when you're an actor or a singer, people have to pay to see you. The relationship is explicitly transactional. So you wait backstage because you aren't part of the audience. That's the whole point. They're there to see you. You are there to be seen. The prerogative and power of spectacle are all in your control. So if you aren't performing, the audience sort of doesn't get access to you. In that economy of scarcity where you have to buy a ticket to get a glimpse, those people only get to see you when you want to be seen. Backstage separates the talent from the rest of us. But this was church. This was just a pasty white guy with hair gel and a white t-shirt talking about his wife and Jesus and introducing some Greek words to us. So I was like, again, why? Why the disappearing and reappearing? It wasn't a Lady Gaga concert. There were no outfit changes backstage. It was the same white t-shirt appeared every time, same hair gel every time. So why? Why are we performing? What are we performing? What is being achieved? And I'm calling attention to this like little choreography, this little dance here now, and picking it apart. But when it was happening, I was like, oh yes, okay. It was so expected. I'd seen it so many times that I almost did not even think about it. I didn't use my critical thinking because I was like, oh, this is church. This is pastor congregation, you know? And yet this is a church that is supposedly doing things differently, but not this. They're not doing pastor differently. Pastor as performer, pastor as higher than is actually pretty old. The embodiment of appearing and reappearing, disappearing and reappearing, communicated a kind of hierarchy The pastor was exceptional, set apart, special. The stagecraft communicated exclusion. The pastors could easily have sat in chairs like the rest of us, but they didn't. They could have arisen from those chairs and walked 2 steps up to the stage to speak, but they didn't. They appeared out of nowhere, and a spotlight brought their light into the darkness. That was a choice, a powerful choice. And I can't stress enough that the church we visited is one in like a million churches who set the pastor above in one way or another, and other churches do so even more dramatically, right? This church that we visited is not unique in this, but that's kind of my point. Like, this church, I think, was on a PBS special about churches that are doing things different and succeeding, but they didn't rethink pastoral power. In rethinking church, they sort of continued to preserve this very old religious hierarchy that Jesus of Nazareth himself spoke against. And here's the wild thing: the pastor was introducing some new small groups that they're putting together, and telling people this was their chance to to be part of something smaller. And he actually said these words. He said, "We always say here that the most interesting people are not on the mic." And I thought, get those folks a mic. Like, what's stopping you? Hand it over. Why this gesture towards community that had no teeth in it? And it was like, why the aspiration to sort of give something up? Why lip service only? And it's because giving away power is very difficult. This church is trying to move away from evangelical exclusivism, but terrified to give up the authority of the pastor. And I don't think that can be done. I think that any deconstruction, even in half measures, as in this church, has to include the deconstruction of the ego. And so this morning, my main point is about humility, which is ironic because this is the longest talk I will ever give here. So I'm like going to be on the mic for longer than usual, but I promise it's mostly storytelling. So I wanted to talk about humility this morning because I realized, sitting in this other church and thinking about Central, that humility is something that Central does so instinctively. And because as Christians, humility is something we are very clearly called to embody, and because Christians a whole lot of the time fail to be humble. And when I say fail, I maybe should say that many of us fail spectacularly. We all know stories where, instead of embodying humility, church leaders degrade, abuse, and manipulate. And I want to put a biblical anchor on this topic of humility, not because I feel like I have to. Y'all know I broke up with the Bible. But because this literally is one of my favorite literary passages, and it's from Paul. And in Philippians, Paul writes this: "Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself and humbled himself." Now, I think whether you believe in Jesus or not, and no matter what you believe about God, this is a passage to live and believe by. It says that Jesus, this powerful entity, if you're Christian, the most powerful entity, endowed with the power of God, chose to give up that power and instead be a vessel. It says that we, when we have power, ought to give up that power and humble ourselves. It's a really challenging passage. And it seems to be particularly challenging to some religious authorities who completely ignore it, because giving away power is very difficult. and yet it is what we are called to do. What our pastors do and how they do it is no small thing. If a pastor is not humbling himself, I think we have to ask why. We have to ask why he needs to feel separate and higher. Because if he is exercising this privilege, then there is some kind of exploitation happening in the church. I have some emotion behind my words this morning, and it's not because of the stagecraft in the church that we just visited. I was away in Oregon last week, and I spent time with some friends that I haven't seen since we grew up in church together. And they just left their mid-size, about 300 people church, had have started a process of deconstruction, or they call it disentanglement. My friend, who I'll call Amy, she was the church office manager. And during her tenure, they hired a new youth pastor. And he ended up being pretty demanding, like from the start, basically. Shortly after he was hired, he would walk into the office like every day and imperiously ask her if his church credit card had arrived yet. And after a while, he just demanded that Amy give it to him as if she could hurry up the US mail. Well, Amy then learned that the youth pastor had been meeting alone with her daughter, Jessica. Jessica was suffering from an eating disorder, and she developed a spiritual practice of going to the chapel every morning to pray. She wanted the quiet time to strengthen herself. And the youth pastor noticed this and started showing up every morning at the chapel with her. He started grooming her, preying on this young girl's weakness. Imagine, if you can stand it, the interior life of this youth pastor, grooming the daughter in the morning and yelling at the mother in the office in the afternoon. This is the pastor. The pastor. You could see the kind of authority that he thinks he is endowed with by the way he spoke to the mother, as if his needs were more important than the way he treated her. And the fact that he treated the mother that way while grooming the daughter tells me that he felt no obvious guilt about the grooming, about the way he was treating the daughter. And I have a hard time understanding how that's possible, especially in a pastor. And I can't think of it as possible unless I just tell myself that he thinks he is superior, that his call from God has set him apart and given him a different set of rules that are different from everyone else. Now, I'm going to say something about theology in America, which is kind of a side note, but I feel compelled to say this. I think this kind of abuse is allowed by a theology that is rampant in this country, a theology where it truly does not matter how you treat people, as long as you are proclaiming to them that Jesus is the Son of God. This is superficial theology. It creates a dangerously thin line between obeying God and serving the ego. A line so thin, I think, that ego and God get conflated. And folks, especially folks with power, feel like they have carte blanche to feel superior. Obeying God becomes so absolute, so separate from anything else, and so abstracted from real life that it doesn't matter what destruction these people leave in their wake, as long as that destruction is done while they are proclaiming Jesus as the Son of God and the salvation for humankind. I fear that some Christian pastors do not know the difference between obeying God and serving their ego, because as they were learning to lead, they were not taking Jesus as their model. They were not learning how to be humble, how to be a vessel, how to let God work through them in the way that they treat other people. A lot of those leaders who are now deconstructing and even leading deconstructing churches or talking on deconstruction TikTok channels, learned to lead in a context that did not question their ego. And you can't bring that authoritarian culture into deconstruction with you. If pastors coming out of evangelicalism mean to truly deconstruct, they have to include their own egos in that deconstruction. And this egoic deconstruction has to be done actually by all of us, not just the so-called leadership. Everyone in the congregation has to reflect on its part in the unhealth of the church. Everyone has to do the inner work. We can't just, it turns out, reject a structure that hurt us or a leadership team that misused power. When we deconstruct, we have to look at what we internalized from that culture. We have to look at what it was maybe about us that attracted us to an unhealthy community that we have since left. We have to root out our bias for the patriarchy, for male power and authority and traditional gender roles. We have to root out the comfort we get from being told that we are right and they are wrong, and break the addiction to certainty. We have to root out the desire for in-group security that is served by church's creation of an us and a them. We have to root out our hunger for the ease and convenience of sitting back and watching a performance, and manage our desire to be passive spectators instead of active participants. We have to root out all sense of superiority and replace it with a willingness to empty ourselves, to listen, to be quiet, curious, reflective, repentant, and vigilantly self-aware. I think my friend Amy is right in the middle of finding out that leaving toxic structures is not enough. Everyone has to do the inner work, or else the power structures that we leave behind live on inside each of us. When Amy left this mid-sized church, several other families did as well, and they formed a house church. 4 or 5 families, Gen X parents with Gen Z kids. Recently, the question arose in their little house church of inviting other people to join them. And one of the parents immediately said, well, as long as they believe the same as we do, they can join. And this was kind of a way of saying, we've got it right, and we're going to gatekeep. Well, but we'll let anybody in who doesn't challenge what we already think. And Amy knew that of all the things that this communicated, it was absolutely code for not being open and affirming. Amy also knew that her own child was queer, but closeted in the house church. And she knew that one of the other parents' kids was also queer and planning to come out any day now. So when I stayed with Amy, all of these secrets were teetering on the edge, like quarters about to fall in one of those coin pusher games at the arcade. Members of the house church, these were congregants who were rejecting toxic power structure, had not changed their hearts of exclusion. They were sort of toying with deconstruction or detangling their faith from toxic power structures, but they had not embraced the freeing heart of deconstruction and of Christianity itself, which is humility. They still wanted to be right. They were still creating an us and a them. They were holding to certainty instead of love. And so now I've come to the part of my talk where I intended fully intended to extol Central's humility. And it's really what drove me to write this talk. Is I was sitting there and I was so grateful for this community that was the opposite of pretty much everything I've said up until this point. And then I realized I really can't do that. I mean, of course I can't. I can't like boast and brag about our humility here, right? Talking about it even kind of, I feel like that talking about it is the magic spell that makes it go away. So I don't want to do that. I don't want to pat us on the back and say, good job, because when you're actually humble, you know the job is never done. That you always have to be vigilant and self-aware and questioning, and we are. And so let me just reiterate what I said in the beginning. As I watched the pastors appear and disappear and reappear and be spotlit, as I felt the us and them of pastoral power created in real time in that space, in our presence, as I saw what seemed to me to be performative emotion play across the faces of the worship team, I was so grateful for Central, where I've never seen performative emotion on Max's face, where the discussion is often longer than the talk, although maybe not this morning, since I've rambled on, where we pass the mic freely, where Bob and Aaron and Max and myself sit in the same chairs that everyone else sits in. And when I was there experiencing all of that, the word that came to mind for me was humility. It is here. It's palpable. It just is with us. We could call it the Holy Spirit. It just is with us. And I wanted to talk about it today because I want to kind of memorialize it, because I want us to keep it that way. No matter what kind of growth or newness is in our future, I think we have this one really precious thing that we can't brag about, we can't boast about, we can't put it on our website and say the humble church, right? In like modern font with a period after it. But I do think that this is what we offer Los Angeles, or one of the things that we offer Los Angeles. I think it's one of the ways that we are different in this landscape of churches here. In a town where it is so easy to be a spectator, even in church, we offer the chance to speak and be known. In a town where public displays of all kinds are slick and rehearsed, we're a little bit awkward and off the cuff. In a town where it is so easy to serve the ego, we offer an environment of deep reflection, non-judgment, and curiosity. In a town that serves up entertainment reflexively, we provide community instead. So that's what I wanted to say today. And just open up for any questions or comments. If anyone wants to brag about how humble we are, you know. I saw Jason first, and then Akilah.
Mike? Yeah. All right. I have so many thoughts. I wanted to say first, thank you. I think having humility as an intention when we're making decisions about church, or we're setting up or working on our church structure, or having these services is a fundamental, really important value. I wrote it down as a church value. And I think it is one of the things that drew me here in 2013, 14. we had a debate about that. Um, when I was in high school, when I started getting disenchanted with, or maybe I just grew up out of what I grew up in. My best friend in high school was a pastor's kid, and
Mm.
I think this stereotypically there's two kinds of pastors' kids. There's like the good one, and then there's the rebel. Either they like go all in or they drop it all. And he was a go all in guy, right? So he was being taught to be a pastor when he grew up. He eventually became a pastor when he grew up. And I would hang out at his house every day after school. So I hung out with the pastor and the family like every day. Like his mom made me dinner, you know, um, and we'd watch cartoons or whatever. Um, I actually, when I started doing this, getting sort of fed up with this whole thing, I actually came to the pastor and I said basically like, what gives, I mean, kind of like this, what gives you the authority to be the head, the one that communicates the spiritual values of the church? Because my conversations with my friend, a lot of it was like, why do you want to be a pastor? Well, the pastor sort of leads the flock, right? We're the spiritual ones. So I asked him, like, can you give me like biblical basis for that? Which I'm sure was annoying to have a high school kid, challenge you and all this stuff. And he didn't really pull it off. Like he had pulled a couple things about priests in the Bible and stuff like that, but he sort of dodged the question. Fast forward to what, like 15 years later or something, 20 years later. I'm old. And I'm here. I've been going to evangelical churches. Anyway, when I came to Central, one of the first, what was really important to me was um, knowing if Central was part of a denomination, if there was what is the sort of, what they call it, the creed of the church, that they post on the websites, and where does the money come from? Those were my questions because I had fully gotten fed up with the church, this church structure, right? Of lack of transparency, hierarchy, and stuff like that. And I mean, right out of the gate, no central head of the church, right? Aaron's a teaching pastor; he's not the boss. Um, Self-funded, not part of a denomination that mandates a code or a creed, and no serious like the belief requirements on the website and stuff. And that's one of the main reasons I think I've sort of gotten more involved and become part of this, because there is this sort of, maybe we haven't spoken it out loud, but this sort of intention of humility that sort of is built in to this.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it.
Thank you. First, thank you. Um, my daughter and I joke. We're always like, I'm the most humble, right? Like, who's more humble than I am? I'm the best at being humble. I love disentanglement. First of all, I think that's great.
That's pretty cool.
So I kind of had three thoughts. One is, it was interesting in your talk when you said about the pastor up in Oregon, what gave him the right or the authority to do this.
Yeah.
And the first thing I thought was the opposite of what you thought was, he is just a man, right? So it's not that, it's that he's setting himself apart, but he is just a man with whatever his flaw. I'm not saying it's okay, but I'm just saying that that's kind of what I thought of. The second thing I thought of too is, you mentioned it's this idea of like the contradiction of the expectation of performance versus not wanting performance. And I was like, that's so true, because I remember when I went to my friend's church, or she was talking about it, and she was like, yeah, he just wears polos and jeans. Like the pastor wears polos and jeans. and because he said he's not better than or less than anybody, and it was still the question of, but how do you know he's the pastor then?
Mm.
Like, how do you know he's the pastor if he looks like everybody else?
Yeah.
Or there's nothing, not a collar, not like a sigil. Like what makes him the pastor if he's just wearing jeans and a t-shirt? And the expectation of the performance is Central is set up the same way, and I didn't think about it until you mentioned the in and out and how it was different, and I was like, right, and I still expect that even though I'm getting something different. But now that I've been here, I know that that's not how it works.
Yeah.
But I still like if I go somewhere else, I'm just like, well, how do you know who the pastor is? What are they doing? How do you know? And I also thought it was funny when we talked about the white pastor coming out and doing a thing, because that's also what we have here. So how different is that really? I don't know.
Wait, you were say that
the white pastor at the church with the t-shirt and the thing and the. No, I understand, but what I'm just saying is, I understood your point, but I'm saying at Central, it looks like that too. So which was a little disappointing when I looked at the website. But I do like the church, and I'm here, and I do see that the church is doing something different.
Yeah.
So
I understood what you said. I just, it reminded me there was a part of the talk that I took out because I was like, this is a whole other talk. But there is a thing with deconstruction. It's just, and there's nothing wrong with being a white male. I apologize, I'm using these terms, but like,
that's your fault.
But like, deconstruction is like very, very white, and it's actually very, very male as well. And I had that in my talk, sort of like as a side note. And I was like, take out the side note. The talk is already 20 minutes. But I do think it's something that we're in a good position to talk about. Is like, why is this thing we call deconstruction again kind of being led by white men? And at the same time, I still feel like I'm coming in from the outside a little bit, right? I haven't been here as long as anyone in this room. And I looked at the website and I was like, what's going on here? And I've now sat in board meetings and services, and where the humility is honestly astounding to me. My previous church was run by, well, I mean, if you want to just get really specific, white women, right? And this is more, so it's like you can't just make assumptions, but anyway. Let's bookmark this, because it's something that I think as a congregation we need to think about, because one of the things about this other church, so diverse, in comparison. So, I don't have the answers, but it's a great question.
First of all, thank you for your talk and your stories. I feel like stories are the best way to learn and to teach and communicate. And I heard everything you said, which is amazing. And I was thinking during your talk about the difference between humbling yourself and hating yourself.
Ooh.
And I don't mean like, oh, don't hate yourself. That's not what I mean. I mean, people in power, I think, really hate themselves. And they, they go to confession and they flog themselves and they're like, I hate myself. And then they wake up the next day and they do it again. And they think because they hate themselves that they have this humility, or like because they hate themselves, it's like, I know I'm a bad person, and so it's okay. Like, I'm just, because we come from Catholicism, so I'm thinking about like confession, and like, the man will push his daughter and hate himself, but he hates himself, so it's okay. Just the difference between, I think a lot of these awful people who are in power, Donald Trump, I do think they hate themselves, and I think that's very different from humility. Yeah, it's just this thought I had.
It's really interesting. It's like, why not be bad again? Because I'm just a bad person. It's just, it's inevitable, and I hate myself, so it's okay because I'm punishing myself while I'm doing it. Interesting.
And then trying to force everybody else to be the good that I should be. Yeah.
Mm.
Oh yeah, I just want to add, I did come from a UCC church, which is a congregational church, and they had already been well established by the time I got there. But one of the things that they did talk about a lot was the gender dynamics, and even like with the logo, because they had people holding hands, and it was like at first it was a man at the top, then and then they split it. Like it was just like all of these things, but they had the conversations, which is what you were talking about.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that drew me to Central are these conversations. Like this is very different, and I don't get this anywhere else, and I appreciate it. And so I think that even the willingness, like you were saying, the humility, the willingness to look at things, and then it's not performative, because I think it's really easy to be performative. Like we should have a diverse board, and then but we base it on the way someone looks and not their beliefs, and then that creates a whole different problem. Like it's just, so I think that, which is something we talk about work all the time, like, oh yes, let's just hire a Latina, but she thinks just like everybody else, and so it would have been better maybe to have somebody from a public school come in and do the so it's like there's diversity of experience, and there's all kinds of things, but I think the willingness to look at it is the real humility. And so yeah, I just appreciate that.
Thank you for saying that and bringing that up. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for that great discussion and for being open to my thoughts. And hope to see you, as many of you as possible, at Brew Church on Wednesday. Great. I talked to Aaron last time, or a couple